Oh, hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. Chapter 5. A Fair Start. The name of the coachman was John Manley. He had a wife and one little child, and they lived in the coachman's cottage, very near the stables. The next morning he took me into the yard and gave me a good grooming, and just as I was going into my box with my coat soft and bright, the squire came in to look at me and seemed pleased. "John," he said, "I meant to have tried the new horse this morning, but I have other business. You may as well take him around after breakfast. Go by the common and the high wood, and back by the watermill and the river. That will shoe his paces." "I will, sir," said John. After breakfast he came and fitted me with a bridle. He was very particular in letting out and taking in the straps to fit my head comfortably. Then he brought the saddle. That was not broad enough for my back. He saw it in a minute and went for another, which fitted nicely. He rode me first slowly, then a trot, then a canter, and when we were on the common, he gave me a light touch with his whip, and we had a splendid gallop. "Ho, ho, my boy," he said as he pulled me up. "You would like to follow the hounds, I think." As we came back through the park, we met the squire and Mrs. Gordon walking. They stopped, and John jumped off. "Well, John, how does he go?" "First rate, sir," answered John. "He is as fleet as a deer and has a fine spirit too, but the lightest touch of the rein will guide him. Down at the end of the common we met one of those travelling carts, hung all over with baskets, rugs, and such like. You know, sir, many horses will not pass those carts quietly. He just took a good look at it, and then went on as quiet and pleasant as could be. They were shooting rabbits near the high wood, and a gun went off close by. He pulled up a little and looked, but did not stir a step to right or left. I just held the rein steady, and did not hurry him. And it's my opinion he has not been frightened or ill-used while he was young." "That's well," said the squire. "I will try him myself tomorrow." The next day I was brought up for my master. I remembered my mother's counsel and my good old master's, and I tried to do exactly what he wanted me to do. I found he was a very good rider, and thoughtful for his horse too. When he came home, the lady was at the hall door as he rode up. "Well, my dear," she said, "how do you like him?" "He is exactly what John said," he replied. "A pleasanter creature I never wish to mount. What shall we call him?" "Would you like Ebony?" said she. "He is as black as ebony." "No, not Ebony." "Will you call him Blackbird, like your uncle's old horse?" "No, he is far handsomer than old Blackbird ever was." "Yes," she said, "he is really quite a beauty, and he has such a sweet, good-tempered face, and such a fine, intelligent eye. What do you say to calling him Black Beauty?" "Black Beauty? Why, yes. I think that is a very good name. If you like it, it shall be his name." And so it was. When John went into the stable, he told James that master and mistress had chosen a good, sensible English name for me. That meant something not like Morengo or Pegasus or Abdallah. They both laughed. And James said, "If it was not for bringing back the past, I should have named him Rob Roy, for I never saw two horses more alike." "That's no wonder," said John. "Didn't you know that Farmer Gray's old Duchies was the mother of them both?" I had never heard that before, and so poor Rob Roy, who was killed at that hunt, was my brother. I did not wonder that my mother was so troubled. It seems that horses have no relations. At least, they never know each other after they are sold. John seemed very proud of me. He used to make my mane and tail almost as smooth as a lady's hair, and he would talk to me a great deal. Of course, I did not understand all he said, but I learned more and more to know what he meant and what he wanted me to do. I grew very fond of him, and he was so gentle and kind. He seemed to know just how a horse feels, and when he cleaned me, he knew the tender places and the ticklish places. When he brushed my head, he went as carefully over my eyes as if they were his own, and never stirred up any ill temper. James Howard, the stable boy, was just as gentle and pleasant in his way, so I thought myself well off. There was another man who helped in the yard, but he had very little to do with Ginger and me. A few days after this, I had to go out with Ginger in the carriage. I wondered how we should get on together, but except laying her ears back when I was led up to her, she behaved very well. She did her work honestly and did her full share, and I never wished to have a better partner in double harness. When we came to a hill, instead of slackening her pace, she would throw her weight right into the collar and pull away straight up. We had both the same sort of courage at our work, and John had oftener to hold us in than to urge us forward. He never had to use the whip with either of us. Then our pace were much the same, and I found it very easy to keep step with her when trotting, which made it pleasant. And Master always liked it when we kept step well, and so did John. After we had been out 2 or 3 times together, we grew quite friendly and sociable, which made me feel very much at home. As for Merrylegs, he and I soon became great friends. He was such a cheerful, plucky, good-tempered little fellow that he was a favorite with everyone, and especially with Miss Jessie and Flora, who used to ride him about in the orchard and have fine games with him and their little dog Frisky. Our master had 2 other horses that stood in another stable. One was Justice, a roan cob used for riding or for the luggage cart. The other was an old brown hunter named Sir Oliver. He was past work now, but he was a great favorite with the master, who gave him the run of the park. He sometimes did a little light carting on the estate, or carried one of the young ladies when they rode out with their father, for he was very gentle and could be trusted with a child as well as Merrylegs. The cob was a strong, well-made, good-tempered horse, and we sometimes had a little chat in the paddock. But of course I could not be so intimate with him as with Ginger, who stood in the same stable. Chapter 6. Liberty. I was quite happy in my new place, and if there was one thing that I missed, it must not be thought I was discontented. All who had to do with me were good, and I had a light, airy stable and the best of food. What more could I want? Why, liberty. For 3 years and a half of my life, I had had all the liberty I could wish for. But now, week after week, month after month, and no doubt year after year, I must stand up in a stable night and day except when I am wanted, and then I must be just as steady and quiet as any old horse who has worked 20 years. straps here and straps there, a bit in my mouth, and blinkers over my eyes. Now I am not complaining, for I know it must be so. I only mean to say that for a young horse full of strength and spirits, who has been used to some large field or plain, where he can fling up his head and toss up his tail and gallop away at full speed, then round and back again with a snort to his companions, I say it is hard never to have a bit more liberty to do as you like. Sometimes when I have had less exercise than usual, I have felt so full of life and spring that when John has taken me out to exercise, I really could not keep quiet. Do what I would, it seemed as if I must jump or dance or prance, and many a good shake I know I must have given him, especially at the first, but he was always good and patient. "Steady, steady, my boy," he would say. "Wait a bit and we'll have a good swing and soon get the tickle out of your feet." Then as soon as we were out of the village, he would give me a few miles at a spanking trot and then bring me back as fresh as before, only clear of the fidgets, as he called them. Spirited horses, when not enough exercised, are often called skittish, when it is only play, and some grooms will punish them, but our John did not. He knew it was only high spirits. Still, he had his own ways of making me understand by the tone of his voice, or the touch of the rein. If he was very serious and quite determined, I always knew it by his voice, and that had more power with me than anything else, for I was very fond of him. I ought to say that sometimes we had our liberty for a few hours. This used to be on fine Sundays in the summer-time. The carriage never went out on Sundays because the church was not far off. It was a great treat to us to be turned out into the home paddock or the old orchard. The grass was so cool and soft to our feet, the air so sweet, and the freedom to do as we liked was so pleasant, to gallop, to lie down and roll over on our backs, or to nibble at the sweet grass. Then it was a very good time for talking, as we stood together under the shade of the large chestnut tree. Chapter 7. Ginger. One day, when Ginger and I were standing alone in the shade, we had a great deal of talk. She wanted to know all about my bringing up and breaking in, and I told her. "Well," said she, "if I had had your bringing up, I might have been as good a temper as you are. But now I don't believe I ever shall." "Why not?" I said. "Because it has been all so different with me," she replied. "I never had anyone, horse or man, that was kind to me, or that I cared to please. For in the first place I was taken from my mother as soon as I was weaned, and put with a lot of other young colts. None of them cared for me, and I cared for none of them. There was no kind master like yours to look after me, and talk to me, and bring me nice things to eat. The man that had the care of us never gave me a kind word in my life. I do not mean that he ill-used me, but he did not care for us one bit further than to see that we had plenty to eat and shelter in the winter. A footpath ran through our field, and very often the great boys passing through would fling stones to make us gallop. I was never hit, but one fine young colt was badly cut in the face, and I should think it would be a scar for life. We did not care for them, but of course it made us more wild. and we settled it in our minds that boys were our enemies. We had very good fun in the free meadows, galloping up and down and chasing each other round and round the field. Then standing still under the shade of the trees. But when it came to breaking in, that was a bad time for me. Several men came to catch me, and when at last they closed me in at one corner of the field, one caught me by the forelock, another caught me by the nose, and held it so tight I could hardly draw my breath. Then another took my underjaw in his hard hand, and wrenched my mouth open. And so by force they got on the halter and the bar into my mouth. Then one dragged me along by the halter, another flogging behind. This was the experience I had of men's kindness. It was all force. They did not give me a chance to know what they wanted. I was high-bred and had a great deal of spirit, and was very wild, no doubt, and gave them, I dare say, plenty of trouble. But then it was dreadful to be shut up in a stall day after day instead of having my liberty, and I fretted and pined and wanted to get loose. You know yourself, it's bad enough when you have a kind master and plenty of coaxing, but there was nothing of that sort for me. There was one, the old master, Mr. Ryder, who I think could soon have brought me round, and could have done anything with me, but he had given up all the hard part of the trade to his son and to another experienced man, and he only came at times to oversee. His son was a strong, tall, bold man. They called him Samson, and he used to boast that he had never found a horse that could throw him. There was no gentleness in him, as there was in his father, but only hardness, a hard voice, a hard eye, a hard hand, and I felt from the first that what he wanted was to wear all the spirit out of me, and just make me into a quiet, humble, obedient piece of horse flesh. Horse flesh! Yes, that is all he thought about. And Ginger stamped her foot, as if the very thought of him made her angry. And she went on, if I did not do exactly what he wanted, he would get put out and make me run round with that long rein in the training field till he had tired me out. I think he drank a good deal, and I am quite sure that the oftener he drank, the worse it was for me. One day, he had worked me hard in every way he could, and when I laid down, I was tired and miserable and angry. It all seemed so hard. The next morning he came for me early and ran me round again for a long time. I had scarcely had an hour's rest when he came again for me with a saddle and bridle and a new kind of bit. I could never quite tell how it came about. He had only just mounted me on the training ground when something I did put him out of temper, and he chucked me hard with the rein. The new bit was very painful, and I reared up suddenly, which angered him still more, and he began to flog me. I felt my whole spirit set against him, and I began to kick and plunge and rear as I had never done before, and we had a regular fight. For a long time he stuck to the saddle and punished me cruelly with his whip and spurs, but my blood was thoroughly up, and I cared for nothing he could do if only I could get him off. At last, after a terrible struggle, I threw him off backwards. I heard him fall heavily on the turf, and without looking behind me, I galloped off to the other end of the field. There I turned round and saw my persecutor slowly rising from the ground and going into the stable. I stood under an oak tree and watched, but no one came to catch me. The time went on. The sun was very hot. The flies swarmed round me and settled on my bleeding flanks where the spurs had dug in. I felt hungry, for I had not eaten since the morning. But there was not enough grass in that meadow for a goose to live on. I wanted to lie down and rest, but with the saddle strapping tightly on, there was no comfort, and there was not a drop of water to drink. The afternoon wore on, and the sun got low. I saw the other colts led in, and I knew they were having a good feed. At last, just as the sun went down, I saw the old master come out with a sieve in his hand. He was a very fine old gentleman with quite white hair, but his voice was what I should know him by, amongst 1,000. It was not high, nor yet low, but full and clear and kind, and when he gave orders, it was so steady and decided that everyone knew, both horses and men, that he expected to be obeyed. He came quietly along, now and then shaking the oats about that he had in his sieve, and speaking cheerfully and gently to me. "Come along, lassie. Come along, lassie. Come along, come along." I stood still and let him come up. He held the oats to me, and I began to eat without fear. His voice took all my fear away. He stood by, patting and stroking me whilst I was eating, and seeing the clots of blood on my side, he seemed very vexed. Poor lassie. It was a bad business. Then he quietly took the rein and led me to the stable. Just at the door stood Samson. I laid my ears back and snapped at him. "Stand back," said the master, "and keep out of her way. You've done a bad day's work for this filly." He growled out something about a vicious brute. "Hark ye," said the father, "a bad-tempered man will never make a good-tempered horse. You have not learned your trade yet, Samson." Then he led me into my box, took off the saddle, and bridled with his own hands and tied me up. Then he called for a pail of warm water and a sponge, took off my coat, and while the stableman held the pail, he sponged my sides a good while so tenderly that I was sure he knew how sore and bruised they were. "Whoa, my pretty one," he said. "Stand still, stand still." His very voice did me good, and the bathing was very comfortable. The skin was so broken at the corners of my mouth that I could not eat the hay. The stalks hurt me. He looked closely at it, shook his head, and told the man to fetch a good bran mash and put some meal into it. How good that mash was, and so soft and healing to my mouth. He stood by all the time I was eating, stroking me and talking to the man. "If a high-mettled creature like this," said he, "can't be broken in by fair means, she will never be good for anything." After that he often came to see me, and when my mouth was healed, the other breaker Job, they called him, went on training me. He was steady and thoughtful, and I soon learned what he wanted. Chapter 8. Ginger's story continued. The next time that Ginger and I were together in the paddock, she told me about her first place. "After my breaking in," she said, "I was brought by a dealer to match another chestnut horse. For some weeks he drove us together, and then we were sold to a fashionable gentleman and were set up to London. I had been driven with a bearing rein by the dealer, and I hated it worse than anything else. But in this place we were, reined far tighter, the coachman and his master thinking we looked more stylish so. We were often driven about in the park and other fashionable places. You who never had a bearing rein on don't know what it is. But I can tell you, it is dreadful. I like to toss my head about and hold it as high as any horse. But fancy now yourself, if you tossed your head high up and were obliged to hold it there, and that for hours together, not able to move it at all, except with a jerk still higher, your neck aching till you did not know how to bear it. Beside that, to have 2 bits instead of 1, and mine was a sharp one. It hurt my tongue and my jaw, and the blood from my tongue colored the froth that kept flying from my lips as I chafed and fretted at the bits and rein. It was worse when we had to stand by the hour waiting for our mistress at some grand party or entertainment. And if I fretted or stamped with impatience, the whip was laid on. It was enough to drive one mad. "Did not your master take any thought for you?" I said. "No," said she. "He only cared to have a stylish turnout, as they call it. I think he knew very little about horses. He left that to his coachman, who told him I was an irritable temper, that I had not been well broken to, the bearing rein. But I should soon get used to it. But he was not the man to do it, for when I was in the stable, miserable and angry, instead of being soothed and quieted by kindness, I got only a surly word or a blow. If he had been civil, I would have tried to bear it. I was willing to work, and ready to work hard too, but to be tormented for nothing but their fancies angered me. What right had they to make me suffer like that? Beside the soreness in my mouth and the pain in my neck, it always made my windpipe feel bad. And if I had stopped there long, I know it would have spoiled my breathing, but I grew more and more restless and irritable. I could not help it, and I began to snap and kick when anyone came to harness me. For this the groom beat me. And one day, as they had just buckled us into the carriage and was straining my head up with that rein, I began to plunge and kick with all my might. I soon broke a lot of harness and kicked myself clear, so that was an end of that place. After this, I was sent to Tattersall's to be sold. Of course, I could not be warranted free from vice, so nothing was said about that. My handsome appearance and good paces soon brought gentlemen to bid for me, and I was bought by another dealer. He tried me in all kinds of ways and with different bits, and he soon found out what I could not bear. And at last he drove me quite without a bearing rein, and then sold me as a perfectly quiet horse to a gentleman in the country. He was a good master, and I was getting on very well, but his old groom left him, and a new one came. This man was as hard-tempered and hard-handed as Samson. He always spoke in a rough, impatient voice, and if I did not move in the stall the moment he wanted me, he would hit me above the hocks with the stable broom or the fork, whichever he might have in his hand. Everything he did was rough, and I began to hate him. He wanted to make me afraid of him, but I was too high-mettled for that, and one day, when he had aggravated me more than usual, I bit him, which of course put him in a great rage, and he began to hit me about the head with a riding whip. After that, he never dared to come into my stall again. Either my heels or my teeth were ready for him, and he knew it. I was quite quiet with my master, but of course he listened to what the man said, and so I was sold again. The same dealer heard of me and said he thought he knew one place where I should do well. "'Twas a pity," he said, "that such a fine horse should go to the bad for want of a real good chance. And the end of it was that I came here not long before you did, but I had then made up my mind that men were my natural enemies and that I must defend myself. Of course, it is very different here, but who knows how long it will last. I wish I could think about things as you do, but I can't after all I have gone through. Well, I said, I think it would be a real shame if you were to bite or kick John or James. I don't mean to, she said. While they are good to me, I did bite James once pretty sharp. But John said, try her with kindness. And instead of punishing me as I expected, James came to me with his arm bound up and brought me a bran mash and stroked me. And I have never snapped at him since, and I won't either. I was sorry for Ginger. But of course I knew very little then, and I thought most likely she made the worst of it. However, I found that as the weeks went on, she grew much more gentle and cheerful, and had lost the watchful, defiant look that she used to turn on any strange person who came near her. And one day James said, I do believe that mare is getting fond of me. She quite whinnied after me this morning when I had been rubbing her forehead. Aye, Jim, 'tis the Britwick balls, said John. She'll be as good as Black Beauty by and by. Kindness is all the physic she wants, poor thing. Master noticed the change too, and one day when he got out of the carriage and came to speak to us as he often did, he stroked her beautiful neck. Well, my pretty one, well, how do things go with you now? You are a good bit happier than when you came to us, I think. She put her nose up to him in a friendly, trustful way, while he rubbed it gently. We shall make a cure of her, John, he said. Yes, sir, she's wonderfully improved. She's not the same creature that she was. It's the Birtwick balls, sir. Ha 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 ha, said John, laughing. This was a little joke of John's. He used to say that a regular course of the Birtwick horse balls would cure almost any vicious horse. These balls, he said, were made up of patience and gentleness, firmness and petting, 1 pound of each to be mixed up with half a pint of common sense, and given to the horse every day. Chapter 9. Merrylegs. Mr. Bloomfield, the vicar, had a large family of boys and girls. Sometimes they used to come and play with Miss Jessie and Flora. One of the girls was as old as Miss Jessie. 2 of the boys were older, and there were several little ones. When they came, there was plenty of work for Merrylegs, for nothing pleased them so much as getting on him by turns and riding him all about the orchard and the home paddock, and this they would do by the hour together. One afternoon he had been out with them a long time, and when James brought him in and put on his halter, he said, There, you rogue, mind how you behave yourself, or we shall get into trouble. What have you been doing, Merrylegs? I asked. Oh, said he, tossing his little head, I have only been giving those young people a lesson. They did not know when they had had enough, nor when I had had enough, so I just pitched them off backwards. That was the only thing they could understand. What? Said I. You threw the children off. I thought you did know better than that. Did you throw Miss Jessie or Miss Flora? He looked very much offended and said, Of course not. I would not do such a thing for the best oats that ever came into this stable. Why, I am as careful of our young ladies as the master could be. And as for the little ones, it is I who teach them to ride. When they seem frightened or a little unsteady on my back, I go as smooth and as quiet as old Pussy when she is after a bird. And when they are all right, I go on again faster, you see, just to use them to it. So don't you trouble yourself preaching to me. I am the best friend and the best riding master those children have. It is not them, it is the boys. Boys, he said, shaking his mane. They are quite different. They must be broken in, as we were broken in when we were colts, and just be taught what's what. The other children had ridden me about for nearly 2 hours, and then the boys thought it was their turn. So it was, and I was quite agreeable. They rode me by turns, and I galloped them about up and down the fields and all about the orchard for a good hour. They had each cut a great hazel stick for a riding whip and laid it on a little too hard. But I took it in good part, till at last I thought we had had enough, so I stopped 2 or 3 times by way of a hint. Boys, you see, think a horse or pony is like a steam engine or a thrashing machine, and can go on as long and as fast as they please. They never think that a pony can get tired or have any feelings. So as the one who was whipping me could not understand, I just rose up on my hind legs and let him slip off behind. That was all. He mounted me again, and I did the same. Then the other boy got up, and as soon as he began to use his stick, I laid him on the grass, and so on, till they were able to understand. That was all. They are not bad boys. They don't wish to be cruel. I like them very well. But you see, I had to give them a lesson. When they brought me to James and told him, I think he was very angry to see such big sticks. He said they were only fit for drovers or gypsies, and not for young gentlemen. If I had been you, said Ginger, I would have given those boys a good kick. That would have given them a lesson. No doubt you would, said Merrylegs. But then I am not quite such a fool, begging your pardon, as to anger our master or make James ashamed of me. Besides, those children are under my charge when they are riding. I tell you they are trusted to me. Why, only the other day I heard our master say to Mrs. Bloomfield, My dear madam, you need not be anxious about the children. My own Merrylegs will take as much care of them as you or I could. I assure you I would not sell that pony for any money. He is so perfectly good-tempered and trustworthy. And do you think I am such an ungrateful brute as to forget all the kind treatment I have had here for 5 years, and all the trust they place in me, and turn vicious because a couple of ignorant boys used me badly? No, you never had a good place where they were kind to you, and so you don't know, and I'm sorry for you, but I can tell you good places make good horses. I wouldn't vex our people for anything. I love them, I do, said Merrylegs, and he gave a low ho, ho, ho through his nose, as he used to do in the morning when he heard James's footsteps at the door. Besides, he went on, if I took to kicking, where should I be? Why, sold off in a jiffy, and no character, and I might find myself slaved about under a butcher's boy, or worked to death at some seaside place where no one cared for me, except to find out how fast I could go, or be flogged along in some cart with 3 or 4 great men in it, going out for a Sunday spree, as I have often seen in the place I lived in before I came here. No, said he, shaking his head. I hope I shall never come to that. Chapter 10. A Talk in the Orchard. Ginger and I were not of the regular tall carriage horse breed. We had more of the racing blood in us. We stood about 15½ hands high, and we were therefore just as good for riding as we were for driving. And our master used to say that he disliked either horse or man that could do but one thing. And as he did not want to show off in the London parks, he preferred a more active and useful kind of horse. As for us, our greatest pleasure was when we were saddled for a riding party. The master on Ginger, the mistress on me, and the young ladies on Sir Oliver and Merrylegs. It was so cheerful to be trotting and cantering all together that it always put us in high spirits. I had the best of it, for I always carried the mistress. Her weight was little, her voice was sweet, and her hands was so light on the rein that I was guided almost without feeling it. Oh, if people knew what a comfort to horses a light hand is, and how it keeps a good mouth and a good temper, they surely would not chuck and drag and pull at the rein as they often do. Our mouths are so tender that where they have not been spoiled or hardened with bad or ignorant treatment, they feel the slightest movement of the driver's hand, and we know in an instant what is required of us. My mouth had never been spoiled, and I believe that was why the mistress preferred me to Ginger, although her paces were certainly quite good. She used often to envy me and said it was all the fault of the breaking in and the gag bit in London, that her mouth was not so perfect as mine. And then old Sir Oliver would say, There, don't vex yourself. You have the greatest order, a mare that can carry a tall man of our master's height, of our master's weight, with all your spring and sprightly action, does not need to hold her head down because she does not carry the lady. We horses must take things as they come, and always be contented and willing so long as we are kindly used. I had often wondered how it was that Sir Oliver had such a very short tail. It was really only 6 or 7 inches long, with a tassel of hair hanging from it, and on one of our holidays in the orchard I ventured to ask him by what accident it was that he had lost his tail. Accident? He snorted, with a fierce look. It was no accident. It was a cruel, shameful, cold-blooded act. When I was young, I was taken to a place where these cruel things were done. I was tied up and made fast so that I could not stir. And then they came and cut off my long, beautiful tail, through the flesh and through the bone, and took it away. How dreadful! I exclaimed. Dreadful! Ha! It was dreadful, but it was not only the pain, though it was terrible and lasted a long time. It was not only the indignity of having my best ornament taken from me, though that was bad, but it was this. How could I ever brush the flies off my sides and my hind legs any more? You who have tails just whisk the flies off without thinking about it, and you can't tell what a torment it is to have them settle upon you and sting and have nothing in the world to lash them off with. I tell you, it is a lifelong wrong and a lifelong loss. But thank heaven, they don't do it now. What did they do it for then? Said Ginger. For fashion, said the old horse with a stamp of his foot. For fashion! If you know what that means, there was not a well-bred young horse in my time that had not his tail docked in that shameful way, just as if the good God that made us did not know what we wanted and what looked best. I suppose it is fashion that makes them strap our heads up with those horrid bits that I was tortured with in London, said Ginger. Of course it is, said he. To my mind, fashion is one of the wickedest things in the world. Now look, for instance, at the way they serve dogs, cutting off their tails to make them look plucky, and shearing up their pretty little ears to a point to make them look sharp, forsooth. I had a dear friend once, a brown terrier, Sky, they called her. She was so fond of me that that she never would sleep out of my stall. She made her bed under the manger, and there she had a litter of 5 as pretty little puppies as need be. None were drowned, for they were a valuable kind, and how pleased she was with them, and when they got their eyes open and crawled about, it was a real pretty sight. But one day the man came and took them all away. I thought he might be afraid I should tread upon them, but it was not so. In the evening, poor Skye brought them back again, one by one in her mouth, not the happy little things that they were, but bleeding and crying pitifully. They had all had a piece of their tails cut off, and the soft flap of their pretty little ears was cut quite off. How their mother licked them, and how troubled she was. Poor thing, I never forgot it. They healed in time, and they forgot the pain. But the nice soft flap, that of course was intended to protect the delicate part of their ears from dust and injury, was gone forever. Why did they cut their own children's ears into points to make them look sharp? Why don't they cut the end of their noses to make them look plucky? One would be just as sensible as the other. What right have they to torment and disfigure God's creatures? Sir Oliver, though he was so gentle, was a fiery old fellow, and what he said was all so new to me and so dreadful that I found a bitter feeling toward men rise up in my mind that I never had before. Of course, Ginger was much excited. She flung up her head with flashing eyes and distended nostrils, declaring that men were both brutes and blockheads. "Who talks about blockheads?" said Merrylegs, who just came up from the old apple tree where he had been rubbing himself against the low branch. "Who talks about blockheads? I believe that is a bad word." "Bad words were made for bad things," said Ginger, and she told him what Sir Oliver had said. "It is all true," said Merrylegs sadly, "and I've seen that about the dogs over and over again where I lived first. But we won't talk about it here. You know that Master and John and James are always good to us, and our talking against men in such a place as this doesn't seem fair or grateful. And you know there are good masters and good grooms besides ours, though of course ours are the best." This wise speech of good little Merrylegs, which we knew quite true, cooled us all down, especially Sir Oliver, who was dearly fond of his master, and to turn the subject I said, "Can anyone tell me the use of blinkers?" "No," said Sir Oliver shortly, "because they are no use." They are supposed, said Justice in his calm way, "to prevent horses from shying and starting and getting so frightened as to cause accidents." "Then what is the reason they do not put them on riding horses, especially ladies' horses?" said I. "There is no reason at all," said he quietly, "except the fashion. They say that a horse would be so frightened to see the wheels of his own cart or carriage coming behind him that he would be sure to run away. Although, of course, when he is ridden, he sees them all about him if the streets are crowded. I admit they do sometimes come too close to be pleasant, but we don't run away. We are used to it and understand it, and if we had never blinkers put on, we should never want them. We should see what was there and know what was what, and be much less frightened than by only seeing bits of things that we can't understand. Of course, there may be some nervous horses who have been hurt or frightened when they were young, and may be the better for them, but as I never was nervous, I can't judge." "I consider," said Sir Oliver, "that blinkers are dangerous things in the night. We horses can see much better in the dark than men can, and many an accident would never have happened if horses might have had the full use of their eyes. Some years ago, I remember, there was a hearse. with 2 horses, returning one dark night. And just close by Farmer Sparrow's house, where the pond is close to the road, the wheels went too near the edge, and the hearse was overturned into the water. Both the horses were drowned, and the driver hardly escaped. Of course, after this accident, a stout white rail was put up that might be easily seen. But if those horses had not been partly blinded, they would of themselves have kept further from the edge, and no accident would have happened. When our master's carriage was overturned before you came here, it was said that if the lamp on the left side had not gone out, John would have seen the great hole that the road makers had left, and so he might. But if old Colin had not had blinkers on, he would have seen it, lamp or no lamp, for he was far too knowing an old horse to run into danger as it was. He was very much hurt, the carriage was broken, and how John escaped, nobody knew.
I should say, said Ginger, curling her nostril, that these men who are so wise had better give orders that in the future all foals should be born with their eyes set just in the middle of their foreheads instead of on the side. They always think they can improve upon nature and mend what God has made. Things were getting rather sore again when Merrylegs held up his knowing little face and said, I'll tell you a secret. I believe John does not approve of blinkers. I heard him talking with Master about it one day. The Master said that if horses had been used to them, it might be dangerous in some cases to leave them off. And John said he thought it would be a good thing if all colts were broken in without blinkers, as was the case in some foreign countries. So let us cheer up and have a run to the other end of the orchard. I believe the wind has blown down some apples, and we might just as well eat them as the slugs. Merrylegs could not be resisted, so we broke off our long conversation and got up our spirits by munching some very sweet apples which lay scattered on the grass. Chapter 11. Plain Speaking. The longer I lived at Birtwick, the more proud and happy I felt at having such a place. Our master and mistress were respected and beloved by all who knew them. They were good and kind to everybody and everything, not only men and women, but horses and donkeys, dogs and cats, cattle and birds. There was no oppressed or ill-used creature that had not a friend in them. And their servants took the same tone. If any of the village children were known to treat any creature cruelly, they soon heard about it from the hall. The squire and Farmer Grey had worked together, as they said, for more than 20 years to get bearing reins on the cart horses done away with, and in our parts you seldom saw them. But sometimes if mistress met a heavily laden horse, with his head strained up, she would stop the carriage and get out, and reason with the driver in her sweet serious voice, and try to shew him how foolish and cruel it was. I don't think any man could withstand our mistress. I wish all ladies were like her. Our master, too, used to come down very heavy sometimes. I remember he was riding me towards home one morning when he saw a powerful man driving towards us in a light pony chaise, with a beautiful little bay pony with slender legs and a high-bred sensitive head and face. Just as he came to the park gates, the little thing turned towards them. The man, without word or warning, wrenched the creature's head round with such force and suddenness that he nearly threw it on its haunches. Recovering itself, it was going on when he began to lash it furiously. The pony plunged forward, but the strong, heavy hand held the pretty creature back with force, almost enough to break its jaw, whilst the whip still cut into him. It was a dreadful sight to me, for I knew what fearful pain it gave that delicate little mouth. But master gave me the word, and we were up with him in a second. "Sawyer," he cried in a stern voice, "is that pony made of flesh and blood?" "Flesh and blood and temper," he said. "He's too fond of his own will, and that won't suit me." He spoke as if he was in a strong passion. He was a builder who had often been to the park on business. "And do you think," said the master sternly, "that treatment like this will make him fond of your will?" "He had no business to make that turn. His road was straight on," said the man roughly. "You have often driven that pony up to my place," said the master. "It only shews the creature memory and intelligence. How did he know that you were not going there again? But that has little to do with it. I must say, Mr. Sawyer, that more unmanly, brutal treatment of a little pony, it was never my painful lot to witness. And by giving way to such passion, you injure your own character as much, nay more, than you injure your horse. And remember, we shall all have to be judged according to our works, whether they be towards man or towards beast." Master rode me home slowly, and I could tell by his voice how the thing had grieved him. He was just as free to speak to gentlemen of his own rank as to those below him. For another day, when we went out, we met a Captain Langley, a friend of our master's. He was driving a splendid pair of greys in a kind of break. After a little conversation, the captain said, "What do you think of my new team, Mr. Douglas? You know you are the judge of horses in these parts, and I should like your opinion." The master backed me a little, so as to get a good view of them. "They are an uncommonly handsome pair," he said. "And if they are as good as they look, I am sure you need not wish for anything better. But I see you yet hold to that pet scheme of yours for worrying your horses and lessening their power." "What do you mean?" said the other. "The bearing reins? I know that's a hobby of yours. Well, the fact is, I like to see my horses hold their heads up." "So do I," said master, "as well as any man, but I don't like to see them held up. That takes all the shine out of it. Now you are a military man, Langley, and no doubt like to see your regiment look well on parade, heads up and all that. But you would not take much credit for your drill if all your men had their heads tied to a backboard. It might not be much harm on parade except to worry and fatigue them. But how would it be in a bayonet charge against the enemy, when they want the free use of every muscle and all their strength thrown forward? I would not give much for their chance of victory, and it is just the same with horses. You fret and worry their tempers and decrease their power. You will not let them throw their weight against their work, and so they have to do too much with their joints and muscles, and of course it wears them up faster. You may depend upon it, horses will intend to have their heads free as men's are, and if we could act a little more according to common sense, and a good deal less according to fashion, we should find many things work easier. Besides, you know as well as I that if a horse makes a false step, he has much less chance of recovering himself if his head and neck are fastened back. And now," said the master, laughing, "I have given my hobby a good trot out. Can't you make up your mind to mount him too, Captain? Your example would go a long way." "I believe you are right in theory," said the other, "and that's rather a hard hit about the soldiers. But, well, I'll think about it." And so they parted.